Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace.
Hey, so how do you feel about whale clients?
I think it's risky. I think it depends on a whole host of factors, but at any point in time, if your revenue is tied to a single source, anything more than, this is probably going to alarm people, and that's okay. Anything more than 20 to 30% of your revenue coming from a single source is alarming, let alone 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 100%, as is the case with many people who have a whale client in their roster. There's a whole bunch of risk, because if that client leaves or they're dissatisfied, it's the most common thing that we hear, to be honest. One of the major triggers that causes a consultant to realize they have zero ways of building pipeline and therefore need help and then come to us is they lost a whale client. It's a huge trigger to working with us. And you almost never see it coming. It's always a surprise. And it's just risky. And I think folks are, when they're in those relationships, far too cavalier about the risks, because when you're working together and things are seemingly going well, you think it's going to continue forever. It's almost like people think it's like an employment contract, but it's really not, right? It's so much easier to terminate a consulting agreement than it is to terminate an employment contract. But we have this false sense of security for whatever reason. And 9 times out of 10, you live to regret it.
Yeah, and the thing that I think is really interesting to watch people do is extract themselves from those relationships, or not necessarily extract themselves, because that's not always the answer, right? But reduce their reliance on those clients. Because I don't think what you're saying, but absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, is that you shouldn't, that you should immediately just cut ties, walk away, give up on that revenue. What we're really talking about is how you get from a place where your eggs are not all in this one gigantic basket. And that is rough, right? Like, I think when we talk about it, everyone would probably agree. Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But when you're staring that decision in the face and you're trying to figure out what to do next, it is a much more challenging exercise to go through, because there are some real fears and some real practical considerations that consultants have to walk through. Now, at the other end, yes, everything feels better. You're more diversified. You have more confidence in your ability to build a pipeline, to bring in new business. But taking the first step, as always, I think the hardest.
It's interesting. You're making me go through this intellectual exercise around answering the question, when is it okay to have a whale? Is it always bad? Are there no circumstances in which this is an okay thing? Let's answer that question for fun. I think it'll also make the opposite clear. In my mind, it's okay to have a whale if, number one, the margins from the deal, from the revenue, are so significant that if after that contract gets terminated, you have significant runway to pay your bills, to pay your team, to pay your expenses while you find another whale. If you can go I don't know, I don't have a magic number in terms of runway, but if you can go longer than it's going to take you to find a new client reasonably, and the money is just so good, and you're not worried about being able to pay the bills after that contract gets terminated, even if it gets terminated earlier than you think it would, okay. I think that's one factor to consider. Second is, how easy would it be for you to find a new client, right? So if you've just got this fantastic network, and this happens, this is not, I wouldn't say it's common. It's not abnormal though, right? You've got this fantastic network in your industry. You know the who's who. Everybody wants to work with you. And, that whale client is just one relationship among many. And you're very confident that if for some reason that contract got terminated, they no longer needed your services anymore, you can go into your network, pull out some conversations, and grab another whale. If those are true, I'm not here to judge.
Yeah, I would also add a third, which is if what you're truly, really looking for, if you look deep down inside, is a job, and it just so happens that the structure of the job is a consultancy agreement. So you're not an employee, you're brought in under a particular kind of contract. I think that's also okay because it's a decision that you've made. But I think it's only okay if it's a decision that you've made. I think the problem really appears when you decide that you are an entrepreneur, when you believe that you are going to go and build a full book of business, and then you instead get yourself connected in one of these whale client relationships and don't really do the work that's required to build a diversified business.
And why don't they? Well, why do you find that most people who are in a relationship where they have a big whale client, despite their better judgment, because I do, fundamentally believe that people understand that that's risky, why don't they go out and diversify?
To me, I think two reasons. One is financial. I see the money, I see the stability around the money, and I just put out of my mind that this isn't going to be something that lasts forever. I think that's one. The second, and this might be more common, especially with folks who were previously employed, is you don't know what you don't know necessarily. So it can feel very, very comfortable, right? It can feel like the thing that you walked away from, whether you walked away purposefully because you didn't want to be there, or whether you were forced out of whatever position you were in. I think there's a very strong sense of comfort that comes from a relationship that feels like employment. And it takes some soul searching to pull yourself away from that. If that's something that you're used to, you've been in that position for, in that scenario for 20 years, there's just a comfort level that exists, and you probably don't really recognize what the other way of life looks like.
That's so interesting. So you're saying it's like finding a partner. You know how you tend to find partners that mirror the trauma they experienced as a child with your parents. So finding clients is the same. You tend to find clients that mirror the trauma you experienced as an employee. Is that what you're saying?
Sure, maybe. But you're not wrong in terms of relationships, right? I mean, I think we've all been, I won't speak for you, but in relationships that lasted far too long because, you know what, inertia. And so, and just familiarity.
The devil, you know.
The devil, you know. Exactly.
I think the other challenge with whale client relationships is scope tends to get out of hand.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point about money, it's the easy money, right? So if you're already working with them and then they add scope and you can charge for it, well, that's certainly easier than going out and finding another client because you already have the relationship. It's comfortable. You know how they work. You know how they operate. Probably not going to haggle a lot on fees because they already have a bill rate with you, yada, 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 right? Take the money. And I think for a lot of people, it's difficult to, let's say you've got an agreement for, $250,000 a year, just for example, right? And maybe that's, not a full-time arrangement for you. And you could go out and find other clients, but then they drop another $250,000 a year on your plate, right? Or something smaller even. And then slowly but surely it ends up taking up all of your time. And I think the big thing that I see is for folks who are in these whale client relationships is they know that it's risky. They understand intellectually that they ought to diversify. They don't have the time. They're completely taxed and spent using up all of their free time, all of their working hours to serve this client. And, frankly, clients got you where they want you. You're completely
Absolutely.
reliant on them. So what are you going to do now? You have, we talk about power positioning, right? This is the opposite of power positioning. You have zero power in that relationship. They know that you're their only client, that they're your only client. They know you're reliant upon them. So if they don't like the work and you disagree, who's going to win that argument?
Yeah.
And if they haggle you on fees, who's going to win that argument?
Absolutely. And just you saying that, it reminded me of a client I was talking to yesterday. And there's someone who's finished our 90-day program and they're going to stay with us. And the real, the big reason they want to stick with us is not that they've lost a whale client. They have their whale client. Excuse me. And the big thing that they're fighting right now is this scope creep. And the conversation we had was about the reason that they want to stick with us and, really figure out how to build their pipeline is that they're not doing the work they want to do. So I think that's a different level of this. It's not just necessarily about risk, financial risk or risk around stability. It's also recognizing that you wanted to be a consultant because there was a particular problem you wanted to solve, a particular type of people you wanted to work with, a particular thing you wanted to do. And when, as in, excuse me, and when, as in this client's case, their client who respects them greatly and sees the value that they bring to the table keeps adding things that are not just scope creep, but completely different pieces of work. And so, they talk about the fact that they are now incredibly busy, right? To your point, as if it's a full-time job. And almost none of what they're working on is the core offer that they want to be delivering on. And did they make that choice intentionally? Partially, but the reality is it happened over time. It was insidious, right? More things kept coming. It's paying their mortgage in a lovely home and keeping them doing the things that they want to do personally, but professionally, they realize that they are now in this space where they are not at all doing the thing that had them start the business in the first place.
Shockingly similar to why people don't quit their jobs, even though they know that
Yes,
they should.
you got it.
It reminds me, honestly, of kind of the early days of my business. I didn't have a whale necessarily, but I had 3 to 5 whales, let's say, at any given point in time. I ran a retainer business. I would go in as the hired gun, a fractional director of marketing, and I'd take on 3, 4, 5 clients at a time. And so different from having a single whale, but my business, my revenue was concentrated in less than 5 clients at any given point in time, probably 5 or 6 at the most. And what I found, what happened was, again, I was getting pulled into things that, listen, if you're smart and you're good at what you do, you can solve a lot of problems. There's lots of problems I can solve. And eventually clients figure that out. And they're, let's give it to so-and-so. I mean, we do this, right? With consultants that we work with, right?
Of course.
Someone's smart and they're capable and they're around, give them something else to do, right? Just makes good sense. And so that was happening a lot is, scope would start expanding. Oh, can you help with this? And can you help with that? I'm getting involved in conversations that, I can be useful in. I don't want to be in. And for me, the shift was, well, I want to go from working with just these 5 clients to working with hundreds. Instead of solving a whole host of their problems, solve something very specific. And that's where 90-day pipeline came from. I'm thinking about another example of a client that we're working with right now, who's a business consultant, business coach, kind of an admitted self-proclaimed generalist. Right? That's why he came to us. And he's been doing a whole bunch of work with his consulting clients across all different areas of their business, kind of whatever they need, right? And he started to develop this specialization, this focus in employee success, employee engagement. And so he came to us because he said, I'm tired of doing all things for all people. I want to do this very specific thing for more clients. And he's going to do very well with that focus. So, there ought to come a point in time, to your point, where you realize maybe I'm underutilized in solving every problem that this single organization has. Maybe I can focus and go back to our episodes on positioning and focus. If you want some more listening on that, maybe I ought to focus on the things that I'm actually world class at. And if you do that, it's going to become pretty clear that one single client is going to be insufficient for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also just goes back to the mindset shift from working for somebody else, which means doing whatever they ask you to do, to truly working for yourself and deciding where it is that you spend your time. So I'm sure there are people listening to us who have whale clients. Let's talk about the most important thing you can do, or the first step to take if you recognize that risk exists, if you're willing to look it in the face, and if you want to make a shift.
I want to make just one more point about the downside of working with whale clients. It's kind of hitting me right now, to be honest. I don't know if I've ever thought of it this way before. If you're working with a single whale client, solving a host of problems, right? And maybe there's a couple in there that are your sweet spot that you feel really good about, that you have expertise in, that you'd like to focus on, but because you're working with one client, you can only solve that problem so many times, right? You can't do it over and over and over again. You're really robbing yourself of confidence, expertise, positioning. I mean, you and I both know the feeling, and we see our clients go through this. Where like that there's that point where you find your focus, and you look at a problem set and a client situation, and you go, "Holy smokes! I mean, this is my game. I could do this all day, every day, forever for different clients. No one can solve this problem like me. I'm truly world class at this." You're robbing yourself of that feeling if you're focusing on a single client, because you're doing a whole bunch of everything and never really finding that point of focus. And that's really where consulting businesses take off, frankly. So that's a big cost to pay. To your question about, what do you do? So first of all, I think you have to draw some really hard lines around the arrangement. And sometimes that means taking a cut in revenue in the short term. So, it depends on the context, right? If you're a solo consultant and you're working 40 hours a week with a client, well, that's just not going to work. I don't want you to quit either and terminate the revenue stream, but the question is, can you restructure things to get it down to 30 hours a week, even 35 hours a week, right? If you have a team, you have more options, right? Can you, as the founder or the principal, start to back out of the engagement a little bit, give more responsibility to your team? Either way, you've got to be able to restructure things to find the time required to go out and do some marketing and build a pipeline to bring on new deals.
Yeah, let me just jump there, because I think there's also another scenario which is not as ideal, but sometimes people need to do this, which is you just add on time. So it may be, if you can't restructure in this moment, or if you're not financially stable enough or confident enough to do that, I think what you're getting at here is you've got to find some time to work on building your pipeline. And so, yes, ideally it's a restructure. If it's not, you still have to find the time to build a pipeline.
Well, and that's a really good point. You don't have to find the time to take on more clients. And that's, I think, a trap that a lot of people fall into. They go, where am I going to find the time to bring on more clients? That's not real yet. You don't have clients lining up to work with you. You don't need to worry about finding that time. That's not a real problem. What you need to worry about is finding the time, to your point, to build pipeline and start to engage prospective clients. And then when somebody comes to you through those activities, and that's a smaller amount of time potentially, somebody comes to you and they say, "Hey, we'd like to work together." Now you've got a decision to make. How do I now engage this client? Do I need to restructure my other arrangement? Can I bring on a team member? Can I bring on a contractor? Now you've got, potentially options, but don't worry about taking on another client until you've got another client that wants to come on with you.
Yeah, I think that's maybe the most important point, right? If you're in this position, it probably seems overwhelming to make a big shift, but that's your one tiny step.